to whoever finds these pages after I am gone, I write this account by candlelight, as the spring rain drums against the roof of this cabin that has been my salvation and my prison these past 2 years. The doctor from Fort Laramie says my fever may yet break, but the look in his eyes betrays his words. So I commit to paper what I cannot carry with me, a burden too heavy for the journey ahead. I was 16 when the Platte River took my parents. 16 and alone in a world that has little mercy for orphan girls, let alone those who choose to remain in the wilderness rather than submit to the dubious charity of distant relations. Perhaps that stubbornness is what saved me, or perhaps it merely prolonged my suffering. The Lord works in ways I've long since stopped trying to understand. Our homestead sat 3 days' ride from the nearest settlement, nestled in a valley where the tall grass whispers secrets to those patient enough to listen. Father chose this spot for its rich soil, and the river that curves like a sleeping serpent around our land. "Water gives life, Emma," he would say, his voice deep as the earth he tilled. The irony of his words haunts me still. The same river that fed our crops and slaked our thirst rose up in fury during the Great Flood of '35, swallowing our barn and livestock in its rage. I watched from the hillside as my parents fought to save what little we had. The memory comes to me often in dreams. Mother's blue dress billowing like a storm cloud as the current took her, father diving in after, his strong arms, no match for the river's judgment. I buried what little of them I found beneath the old oak that marks the eastern boundary of our land. 2 small crosses, weathered now by seasons of neglect. I couldn't bring myself to leave them, to abandon the only home I'd ever known. So I stayed, learning through bitter trial how to survive alone, how to hunt with father's rifle, to skin rabbits and preserve meat for winter, to patch the roof and chop enough wood to keep the cold at bay. My hands, once soft from mother's insistence that I practice my letters and needlework, grew calloused and strong. The settlers who occasionally passed through looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. A girl alone was an oddity, something unnatural. The women would cluck their tongues and offer to take me east, while their husbands eyed our land with poorly disguised interest. I refused them all. This was Caldwell land, paid for in sweat and blood, and I would not surrender it. It was the Arapaho who saved me that first winter, though they didn't know it. I watched them from hiding as they hunted the forests that bordered our homestead, studying how they moved through the wilderness like shadows, how they wasted nothing of what they took. I learned from their example, though I never dared approach them. Father had always traded fairly with the native people, but Mother filled my head with terrible stories of savagery and warned me to keep my distance. I lived this way for nearly 2 years, speaking to no one save the occasional traveler or trapper who might trade supplies for a hot meal. I talked to myself often, sometimes in Mother's voice, sometimes in Father's, desperate to remember the sound of them. On the darkest nights, when wolves howled in the distance and the cabin creaked with loneliness, I wondered if I might be going mad. And then came the storm that changed everything. It was late April, that uncertain time when winter reluctantly releases its grip and spring struggles to assert itself. 3 days of relentless rain had turned the yard to mud and set the river to rising again. I watched it anxiously from my window, ready to flee to higher ground if necessary. The memory of the flood was still too fresh, the nightmares too vivid. As dusk fell on the 3rd day, the rain finally began to slacken. I ventured out to check the smokehouse and ensure my meager stores were secure. That's when I heard it. A sound so faint I might have missed it had the wind not carried it to me at just the right moment. A cry, human and pained, coming from the direction of the river. I should have barred my door. I should have loaded Father's rifle and waited until morning when the light would reveal whether the sound belonged to friend or foe. That would have been the sensible thing, the safe thing. Instead, I grabbed my shawl and Father's old tin lantern and stepped into the gathering darkness. The river had swollen to twice its normal width, churning and angry as it tore at its banks. I followed the sound along the shore. the mud sucking at my boots with each step, and there, clinging to the exposed roots of a half-collapsed willow, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 14, her black hair plastered to her face by rain and river water. Even in the poor light, I could see she wore the dressed deerskin clothing of the Arapaho. One of her legs was bent at an unnatural angle, and her dark eyes were wide with pain and fear. We stared at each other for a long moment, the roar of the river filling the silence between us. I thought of Mother's warnings, of the stories settlers told around their fires. I thought of my own vulnerability, a girl alone with no one to protect her. Then I thought of my parents, claimed by these same waters, and something inside me hardened into resolve. I set down the lantern and extended my hand. "Come," I said, though I knew she likely wouldn't understand. "I'll help you." She didn't move, her gaze darting between my face and my outstretched hand. The river rose higher, water now lapping at her waist. Soon the roots she clung to would give way entirely. I stepped closer, my feet now in the freezing current. "Please," I said, meeting her eyes, "let me help you." Something in my voice or face must have convinced her, for she released one hand from the roots and reached for me. Her fingers were ice cold as they gripped mine, her strength surprising despite her injury. But as I tried to pull her toward me, the bank beneath my feet began to crumble. What happened next remains a blur in my memory. The shocking cold of the water as it closed over my head, the girl's hand somehow still in mine as the current dragged us both downstream. The desperate fight for air, for purchase, for life itself. I remember thinking, with a strange clarity, that the river had finally come to claim me as it had claimed my parents, and there was a certain justice in that. Then, pain exploded through my shoulder as we slammed into something solid, a fallen tree, its branches reaching like skeletal fingers across the water. Somehow, I managed to hook my arm over one of those branches, the girl still clinging to me with surprising strength. Inch by agonizing inch, I pulled us toward the shore, my lungs burning, my muscles screaming in protest. When at last we collapsed on solid ground, I lay there gasping, rain pelting my face, too exhausted to move. Beside me, the girl made a soft sound of pain. My lantern was long gone, but in a brief flash of lightning, I saw her leg, the unnatural angle now even more pronounced. Without thinking, I struggled to my feet, bent down, and lifted her in my arms. She was lighter than I expected, all sinew and bone, yet she fought me weakly, making sounds of protest in her language. "Stop!" I gasped, staggering under her weight. "I'm trying to help you." Help. I wasn't sure if she understood, but the fight went out of her, whether from acceptance or exhaustion, I couldn't tell. The journey back to my cabin remains the longest walk of my life. The rain had stopped, but the wind cut through my soaked clothing like knives. The girl shivered violently in my arms, her breathing shallow. Several times I stumbled and nearly fell, my strength failing, but something drove me forward. Perhaps the same stubborn will that had kept me alive these 2 years, or perhaps something deeper, a need to save this one life when I couldn't save those I loved most. By the time we reached the cabin, my arms were numb, and my vision blurred with exhaustion. I somehow managed to shoulder open the door and carry her to my bed. In the light of the banked fire, I could finally see her clearly. She was young, as I'd thought, with high cheekbones and skin the color of burnished copper. A nasty gash crossed her forehead, and her right leg was broken between knee and ankle. Though thankfully the bone hadn't broken through the skin, her clothing was finely made, decorated with intricate beadwork that spoke of care and craftsmanship. Her dark eyes tracked my movements as I built up the fire and gathered what meager medical supplies I possessed. When I approached the bed with a knife to cut away the wet leather covering her injured leg, she tensed, her hand moving to her waist, where I noticed for the first time a small sheath now empty of whatever weapon it had held. "I won't hurt you," I said, showing her the knife, and then pointing to her leg. After a moment's hesitation, she gave a slight nod. I worked as gently as I could, cutting away the sodden leather to reveal the swollen limb beneath. The break was bad, but clean. I'd helped Father set a horse's broken leg once, and while this was different, the principle seemed the same. I needed to straighten the bone and bind it tightly to something solid. I found 2 flat pieces of firewood that would serve as splints. When I returned to the bed, I showed them to her, miming what I intended to do. The girl's face remained impassive, but I saw fear flicker in her eyes. "This will hurt," I warned, knowing she wouldn't understand my words, but hoping my tone conveyed my meaning. "But it has to be done." I gave her a stick to bite down on, then took hold of her leg above and below the break. She made no sound as I pulled the bone straight, but sweat beaded on her forehead, and she bit down so hard on the stick that I heard it crack. Working quickly, I positioned the splints and bound them tightly with strips torn from an old sheet. When it was done, she lay back, her breathing ragged. I covered her with every blanket I could find, then set water to boil for tea. As I worked, I felt her eyes following me, wary but no longer hostile. "My name is Emma," I said, touching my chest. "Emma Caldwell." She said nothing, but I hadn't expected her to. I continued talking as I prepared a simple meal of cornbread and the last of my dried venison, my own voice strange to my ears after so many months of silence. "I don't know what you were doing out there alone or how you hurt your leg. I suppose it doesn't matter now. You can stay until you're well enough to travel. It's not as if I have pressing engagements elsewhere." I laughed at my own poor joke, the sound brittle in the quiet cabin. The girl's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened slightly. That night, I slept on the floor near the fire, one ear alert for any change in my unexpected guest's condition. Just before dawn, I woke to find her watching me, her face unreadable in the dying firelight. "Tanty?" she said suddenly, her voice low and musical. She touched her chest, mimicking my earlier gesture. "Canty?" I learned later that Canty means sings in the Arapaho language, though whether this was her true name or one she chose to give the strange white girl who had pulled her from the river, I never discovered. In those first days, we communicated through gestures and the few words we managed to teach each other. She was wary of me, as I was of her, but necessity forced a tentative trust between us. Her leg was badly broken, and fever set in on the second night. I stayed awake bathing her forehead with cool cloths, praying to a God I wasn't sure I still believed in to spare this one life. By morning, the fever had broken, but she was weak, her normally copper skin ashen. On the third day, as I changed the bandages on her leg, she caught my wrist in a surprisingly strong grip. From beneath the collar of her dress, she withdrew a small leather pouch suspended on a cord around her neck. She pressed it into my palm, her dark eyes intense. "Medicine," she said, one of the few English words she seemed to know. "Help." Inside the pouch was a mixture of dried herbs I didn't recognize. I boiled them as she indicated, making a strong-smelling tea that she drank without complaint despite its bitterness. By evening, her color had improved. As days passed, we established a routine of sorts. I would hunt in the early morning, bringing back rabbits or squirrels to supplement our dwindling stores. Canty would watch from her place in my bed, her keen eyes following my movements as I skinned and prepared the meat. Sometimes she would gesture for me to bring her work, a piece of leather to soften between her hands, or my mother's old sewing basket, from which she would select needles and thread to repair her torn clothing with tiny, precise stitches. We began to exchange words. I would point to objects around the cabin, naming them in English, and she would respond with the Arapaho word: water, fire, knife, blanket, sky, river. Sometimes she would laugh at my clumsy pronunciation, a sound like water over stones that transformed her solemn face. At night, unable to sleep on my hard pallet by the fire, I would tell her stories of my parents, of our journey west from Pennsylvania when I was a child, of the flood that had taken everything from me. I didn't know how much she understood, but it eased something in me to speak these things aloud after so long. In return, she began to sing in the evenings, soft, haunting melodies that made the hair rise on my arms. I didn't understand the words, but the emotion in them transcended language. There was longing in those songs, and grief, and a fierce kind of joy that made my own heart ache in response. Gradually, I pieced together fragments of her story. She had been gathering medicinal plants along the river when the storm began. The rising waters had separated her from her people. She had tried to cross at a shallow point, but had slipped on the wet stones and been swept downstream, breaking her leg in the process. By the time I found her, she had been clinging to those roots for hours, certain she would die there. The river spirits were angry. She told me one evening, her English halting but improving daily. They wanted to take me, but you came. Why? I had no answer that made sense, even to myself. The river already took too much, I said finally. I couldn't let it take you too. She studied me with those dark, knowing eyes. Your people and my people are enemies, she said simply. Many would have left Canty to die. It was true. The relations between settlers and the native tribes had grown increasingly tense in recent years. Rumors of attacks on homesteads spread like wildfire, fueling fear and retribution. Most settlers viewed the Arapaho and their allies as obstacles to be removed, not as people with an equal claim to the land. I'm not most people, I replied, more sharply than I intended. And I have no people, not anymore. Canty shook her head. You have people, she said. They are just not here. I didn't understand what she meant then. I would, soon enough. It happened at dawn, nearly 2 weeks after I'd pulled Canty from the river. Her fever had not returned, and the swelling in her leg had subsided enough that she could move about the cabin with the aid of a crutch I'd fashioned from a forked branch. Her strength was returning, and with it a restlessness I recognized all too well. Soon she would leave, returning to her people, and I would be alone again with only my ghosts for company. I was outside, feeding the few chickens that had survived the winter, when I felt rather than heard a change in the air. A stillness fell over the yard, the birds suddenly silent. I turned slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. They appeared like spirits materializing from the morning mist, 30 or more warriors on horseback, their faces painted for war. They formed a semicircle around the cabin, spears and rifles glinting in the pale dawnlight. At their center rode a man whose bearing marked him as a chief or leader, his face lined with age and authority. My first thought was for Canty. Had they come believing I had harmed her, would they kill me before she could tell them otherwise? My second thought, strangely detached, was that I had left Father's rifle inside, propped against the wall far from my reach. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the cabin door creaked open, and Canty emerged, leaning heavily on her crutch. She spoke rapidly in Arapaho, her free hand gesturing toward me. The leader responded, his eyes never leaving my face. I stood frozen, afraid that any movement might be misinterpreted. The chickens, oblivious to the tension, continued pecking at the feed scattered around my feet. Canty hobbled toward me, her face unreadable. When she reached my side, she turned to face the warriors, placing herself slightly in front of me. It was such a small gesture, but in that moment, it felt like a shield. My father, she said in English, nodding toward the leader, chief of Bear Clan. These are my brothers, my cousins. They searched for me many days. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry as dust. Are they angry? A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed her face. They are surprised. Maka. She pointed to a young warrior whose face bore a striking resemblance to her own. He followed my trail to river, found signs of struggle. They thought you had taken me. But now they know better, I said, hoping rather than believing it to be true. Canty nodded slowly. Now they know. She turned and spoke again to her father, who listened intently, his stern expression unchanging. When she finished, he studied me for a long moment, then made a gesture with his hand. 2 warriors dismounted and approached us. My muscles tensed, ready to run, though I knew it would be futile, but they stopped a respectful distance away and extended their empty hands, palms up. They will carry me, Canty explained. My leg is not strong enough yet for riding. You're leaving. It wasn't a question. Of course she was leaving. She had been separated from her people for weeks, had nearly died. Why would she stay in a cramped cabin with a strange white girl when her family had come for her? Yet something in me had hoped. What? That she might remain? That we might continue our halting conversations, our exchange of words and songs? It was a foolish thought, born of loneliness. I must go home, she said simply. My mother worries. My father has searched many days. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. One of the warriors fashioned a kind of litter from blankets and spears, and they gently lifted Canty onto it. As they prepared to carry her back to the horses, she caught my hand. Emma, she said, her voice low and urgent. You come too. I blinked, certain I had misunderstood. Come with us. To my village. She gripped my fingers tightly. Winter comes again soon. You are alone here. Not safe. For a wild moment, I considered it. To go with them, to learn their ways, to not face another winter of solitude, but reality reasserted itself quickly. I was a settler's daughter. What place could there possibly be for me among the Arapaho? I can't, I said, gently disengaging my hand. This is my home. My parents are buried here. I can't leave them. Disappointment shadowed her face, but she nodded, understanding loyalty to family, to place. Then we will come to you, she said. Before the first snow, bring meat, furs. Help prepare for winter. Before I could respond, she was lifted away, the warriors carrying her carefully to where her father waited. The chief regarded me for a long moment, then inclined his head in what I took to be a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps even respect. Without a word, the Arapaho turned their horses and melted back into the forest as silently as they had appeared. I stood in the yard long after they had gone, the forgotten feed bucket still clutched in my hands, uncertain whether what had just occurred was blessing or portent. True to Canty's word, they returned before the first snowfall. A smaller party this time, just 5 warriors, including her brother Maka. They brought gifts, smoked venison and buffalo meat, tanned hides, bags of wild rice and dried berries, enough to see me through the winter with careful rationing. Canty was not among them. When I asked after her, Maka, who spoke broken English, told me she remained at their winter camp, her leg healing but still weak. She sends words, he said, pressing a small bundle wrapped in deerskin into my hands. Inside was a pair of beautifully beaded moccasins and a pouch of the medicinal herbs she had shown me how to prepare. I tried to offer something in return, some of Mother's preserved jams, a knife Father had traded for. But Maka shook his head. No trade, he said firmly. Gift. For saving Sister. Before they left, Maka walked the boundaries of my land with me, showing me how to set snares for rabbits that would work even through the snow, how to find edible roots beneath the frozen ground. He spoke little, but his instruction was clear and patient. When they departed, I felt better prepared for the coming winter than I had since my parents' death. They came again in early spring, as the ice was breaking up on the river. This time, Canty was with them, moving slowly but without her crutch. Her face lit up when she saw me, and we embraced like sisters long separated. You are still here, she said, pulling back to study my face. I dreamed you would be gone. Where would I go? I asked, gesturing to the cabin, the newly plowed field where I hoped to plant corn when the soil warmed. East, she said simply. To your people. I shook my head. I told you, I have no people. She smiled. A knowing look that made me feel transparent. All have people, Emma. Even you. They stayed 3 days, helping me repair the roof damaged by winter storms, showing me how to smoke fish in the Arapaho way, which preserved it longer than my method. In the evenings we sat around my hearth, and Canty translated as her brother told stories of their ancestors, of the land before white settlers came, of spirits and heroes and great battles. On the final night, as Maka and the others slept rolled in blankets on my floor, Canty and I sat outside beneath a sky blazing with stars. The air was cool but not bitter, carrying the promise of warmth to come. My father says you have strong spirit, Canty said suddenly. Brave heart. I laughed softly. I'm not brave. I'm just surviving. She shook her head. Many survive. Few thrive alone. She gestured to the stars. Even the sky spirits travel in patterns together. It is not good to be always alone. I'm not alone now, I said, bumping her shoulder gently with mine. She smiled, but her eyes remained serious.
Now.
But we leave tomorrow. Summer comes, then fall, then winter again. You need people, Emma. All need people. I had no answer for her. The truth was, I had grown comfortable in my solitude, or so I told myself. The thought of returning east, of living among strangers who would pity the orphaned girl, who would try to mold me into something acceptable, something tame, it was unthinkable. Yet, as spring bloomed into summer, I found myself watching the trail more often, listening for hoofbeats that would herald visitors. The Arapaho came twice more, bringing gifts, sharing knowledge, but their visits were brief. They had their own lives, their own struggles. The pressure from white settlers was increasing, forcing them to move their camps more frequently, to venture further into the mountains to hunt. It was during their midsummer visit that I first heard the rumors. Maka, more talkative now that we had developed a kind of friendship, spoke of soldiers at the fort, of new settlements being established along the river. Bad times coming, he said, his English improving with each visit. White chiefs want all land, no place for Arapaho, for Cheyenne, for Sioux. Surely there's room for everyone, I said, naive in my isolation. This country is vast. Maka's expression darkened. White men always want more, never enough. He pointed to my cabin, my small field. Today they say this enough. Tomorrow they want mountain, river, all land where buffalo roam. I had no argument against this. I had heard my own father speak of expansion, of manifest destiny, though he had been more moderate than most, more willing to live alongside the native peoples rather than displace them. What will you do? I asked. Maka's face grew still, unreadable. Fight, maybe. Move north, maybe. Chief Council decides soon. He looked at me directly then, his dark eyes serious. Bad for you too, Emma. Alone here. When fighting starts, soldiers not ask if you friend to Arapaho. They see woman alone, they think. He trailed off, but his meaning was clear. I felt a chill despite the summer heat. I'll be careful, I promised. Maka shook his head, frustrated by my stubbornness or my naivete, perhaps both. Canty worries for you, he said finally. Sends you this. He handed me a small object wrapped in soft leather. Says to wear always. It was a necklace, similar to the medicine pouch Canty herself wore, but decorated with intricate beadwork in blues and whites. For protection, Maka explained. Old magic. I slipped it over my head, touched by the gesture even if I didn't share their beliefs. Tell her thank you, I said. Tell her I miss her songs. Maka nodded solemnly. She says same, misses your stories. After they left, I found myself touching the necklace often, drawing comfort from this tangible connection to Canty, to people who had become, against all odds, something like friends. The soldiers came in late August, as the corn was ripening in my small field, 3 of them, blue uniforms stark against the golden landscape, riding horses that looked worn from hard travel. I was drawing water from the well when they approached, and I froze, bucket half raised, remembering Maka's warning. The leader, a lieutenant by his insignia, removed his hat as he dismounted. "Good day, miss," he called, his voice carrying the clipped accent of the East. "Lieutenant James Foster, United States Army. Might we trouble you for some water for our horses? We've ridden far." I hesitated, then nodded, setting down my bucket and retreating to the porch where Father's rifle leaned against the wall, within reach but not obviously threatening. The soldiers led their horses to the water trough, speaking quietly among themselves as the animals drank deeply. "You're a long way from the fort," I observed, keeping my voice neutral. The lieutenant glanced up, seeming to reassess me. "Yes, ma'am. We're mapping the territory, scouting locations for new outposts." His gaze swept over my cabin, the field, the repaired barn. "You live here alone, miss?" "Caldwell," I supplied, not answering his implicit question. "Emma Caldwell. Miss Caldwell." He approached the porch, stopping a respectful distance away. It's unusual to find a young woman managing a homestead by herself, especially in this region. There have been incidents with the natives recently. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart raced at his words. "I've had no trouble," I said carefully. "I mind my business, and others mind theirs." One of the other soldiers, a corporal with a scar twisting his upper lip, snorted. "Begging your pardon, miss, but that ain't how Indians think. They see a place like this, woman alone, easy pickings. You're lucky they ain't paid you a visit yet." I bit back a sharp reply, aware that any defense of the Arapaho would only arouse suspicion. "God has watched over me," I said, instead, falling back on piety, which was always safe. The lieutenant studied me thoughtfully. "Nevertheless, it's not safe. There's talk of moving all settlers to protected areas until the Indian problem is resolved. Fort Laramie has space for—" "Thank you, Lieutenant, but I'll stay where I am," I interrupted, my tone sharper than intended. "This is my home. My parents are buried on this land. I won't abandon it." His expression hardened slightly. "It may not be a matter of choice, Miss Caldwell. Orders may come from Washington any day now." "Then I'll consider those orders when they arrive," I replied, lifting my chin. "Now, if there's nothing else you require, I have work to attend to." For a moment, I thought he might argue further, but military discipline prevailed. He replaced his hat, nodded curtly, and returned to his men. As they mounted their horses, the scarred corporal's gaze fell on something at my throat. With a jolt, I realized I had unconsciously been fingering Canty's necklace. His eyes narrowed. "That's Indian work," he said. Not a question, but an accusation. "Where'd you get that?" I let the necklace fall back against my dress, cursing my carelessness. "It was a trade," I said, the lie coming easily. "A trapper brought furs last winter. I gave him some of my preserves, and he offered this. I thought it pretty." The corporal looked unconvinced, but the lieutenant was already turning his horse. "Thank you for the water, Miss Caldwell. We'll be passing through again before winter. I strongly suggest you reconsider your situation by then." I watched them ride away, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. When they were out of sight, I sat heavily on the porch steps, my legs suddenly weak. The encounter had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. The soldier's warning, the threat of forced relocation, the suspicion in the corporal's eyes when he noticed Canty's gift, all pointed to trouble coming, as Maka had predicted. That night, I barred my door and kept Father's rifle close as I tried to sleep. When dawn came, I made a decision. I would go to the Arapaho, warn them about the soldiers' mapping expedition, about the talk of new outposts. It was the least I could do after all they had done for me. The problem was, I didn't know where to find them. In our conversations, Canty and Maka had been deliberately vague about their summer hunting grounds, not out of distrust, but out of well-founded caution. All I knew was that they had moved north, toward the black hills that rose in the distance. It was foolish to even consider such a journey alone, with only the vaguest idea of my destination, but the alternative, waiting passively for events to unfold, seemed worse. I had survived 2 years on my own by being resourceful and determined. Surely I could manage a few days' travel. I spent a day preparing, packing jerked meat and cornbread, filling water skins, gathering what few items I could think to offer as gifts. I wrapped Father's compass carefully in a soft cloth, saddled our old mare who had somehow survived the flood by breaking out of her stall, and set out just as the sun was rising on the second day. The journey north was harder than I had anticipated. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, the trail sometimes disappearing altogether. I rationed my supplies carefully, but by the third day, I was beginning to question my decision. What if I couldn't find the Arapaho camp? What if I became lost in this vast wilderness? It was late afternoon on the fourth day when I spotted smoke rising from a distant valley. I approached cautiously, aware that it might not be the Arapaho but another tribe entirely, perhaps one less inclined to help a lone white girl. When I crested a ridge and saw the distinctive pattern of an Arapaho summer camp spread below, relief washed over me so strongly that I nearly wept. My arrival caused an immediate stir. Warriors appeared as if from nowhere, surrounding me with spears raised. I held up empty hands, hoping they would recognize me before deciding I was a threat. "Canty," I said, one of the few Arapaho words I knew. "Maka. I seek Canty and Maka." There was a flurry of conversation I couldn't follow. Then one of the warriors gestured for me to dismount. I did so on shaky legs, my body stiff from days in the saddle. They escorted me into the camp, where women paused in their work to stare and children darted forward for a closer look before being shooed away. I was led to a large tipic at the center of the camp. Outside, it stood Canty's father, the chief, his face stern as he recognized me. He spoke rapidly to one of the warriors, who nodded and ducked into a nearby dwelling. Moments later, Canty emerged, her eyes widening in shock as she saw me. She limped forward. Her leg had healed but would always bear the mark of her injury, and gripped my arms. "Emma? Why are you here? What is wrong?" I told her everything: the soldiers' visit, their mapping expedition, the talk of relocating settlers and establishing new outposts. As Canty translated, I watched the chief's expression grow increasingly grave. When I finished, he spoke at length, his voice measured but his gestures sharp with urgency. "My father thanks you for this warning," Canty said. "It confirms what our scouts have reported. The blue coats move in many directions now." Maka emerged from the gathering crowd, clasping my shoulder briefly in greeting before joining the discussion. More warriors arrived, forming a circle around us as they debated what my news meant for their people. "You have traveled far alone," Canty said, drawing me away from the men's council toward her own dwelling. "You need rest, food." Inside her tipi, which she shared with 2 older women I took to be relatives, she gave me water and pemmican, watching with concern as I ate. "It was dangerous to come," she said finally. "The hills have eyes. Not all tribes welcome white faces, even friends." "I had to warn you," I said. "After all you've done for me, I couldn't let you be caught unaware." She smiled, though her eyes remained troubled. "Your heart is good, Emma, but now you are here, far from your cabin, when soldiers may return any day." I hadn't thought that far ahead, focused only on reaching the Arapaho with my warning. "I'll leave at first light," I said. "If I ride hard, I can be back before they make another patrol." Canty shook her head. "Too dangerous alone. Maka and others will take you when council ends." She hesitated, then added, "Emma, you should not go back." I stared at her, uncomprehending. "What do you mean?" "Stay with us," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Your cabin is not safe now. Soldiers suspect you already. I see it in your eyes when you speak of them. If fighting comes, you will be caught between." For a wild moment, I considered it. To stay with these people who had shown me more kindness than any settler since my parents' death. To learn their ways, their language fully. To not face the coming conflict alone. "I can't," I said, the words catching in my throat. "My home is wood and mud?" she interrupted. "Your parents' spirits are not in those crosses, Emma. They are in the wind, the river, the stars. They would not want you to die alone protecting empty land." Before I could respond, shouts erupted outside. Canty tensed, listening. More cries followed, and the pounding of hooves. "Riders," she said, pushing aside the tippy flap. "Many riders." We emerged to chaos. Warriors rushed to defensive positions, women gathered children, and in the distance a cloud of dust signaled approaching horsemen. "Soldiers?" I asked, my heart in my throat. Canty squinted against the setting sun. "No, Lakota." Her expression tightened. "Not friends." Maka appeared beside us, a rifle in his hands. "Get inside," he ordered, speaking to both of us but looking at his sister. "Stay low, stay quiet." "What's happening?" I asked, as Canty pulled me back toward her dwelling. "I thought the Lakota were allies." "Were," she said grimly. "No more. They say Arapaho speak too much with whites, trade too much." She cast a meaningful glance at me. "They will not be happy to find you here." We huddled inside the tipi with the other women and children, listening to the commotion outside. I could make out raised voices, the challenging tone universal to confrontations in any language. Through a small gap in the entrance, I saw mounted Lakota warriors facing off against the Arapaho men, their leader gesticulating angrily. "What do they want?" I whispered. One of the older women answered in Arapaho, her voice terse. Canty translated, "They say white soldiers burned their hunting camp, killed 2 young men. They say Arapaho told soldiers where to find them." "That's not true," I said, though I had no way of knowing. The soldiers I met were mapping, not attacking. Canty's expression was grim. Truth matters little now. Lakota blood calls for blood. The argument outside grew more heated. I saw Canty's father standing firm before the Lakota leader, his posture proud but not aggressive. He was trying to defuse the situation, I realized, to prevent violence between tribes that could ill afford to be enemies with white encroachment threatening all. Then a Lakota warrior's gaze swept across the camp and landed on the tipi where we hid. Perhaps he saw movement at the flap, or perhaps instinct told him something was being concealed. He broke from the main group, riding closer despite shouts from both sides. "He comes," Canty said, tensing. "Stay behind me." But it was too late. The warrior dismounted and strode toward our shelter, throwing aside the entrance flap. His eyes found me immediately, and rage transformed his features. He shouted, pointing at me, then turned back to his companions, calling out what could only be an accusation. What happened next remains a blur in my memory. The Lakota leader's head snapped toward our tipi, his expression darkening as he realized an enemy, as he would see me, was present. More warriors approached, weapons raised. Maka and several Arapaho stepped between them and us, rifles and bows at the ready. One gesture, one word misspoken, and blood would flow. I couldn't let that happen. Not when I had come to warn these people not to bring violence upon them. Without stopping to consider the consequences, I pushed past Canty and stepped outside, my hands raised. "I am not with the soldiers," I called out in English, knowing few if any would understand my words, but hoping my tone would convey my meaning. I came to warn the Arapaho about the soldiers. I am not your enemy. Lakota stared at me, momentarily startled by my appearance and boldness. I turned to Canty, who had followed me out. Tell them, I pleaded. Tell them why I'm here. She did, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent camp. I watched the Lakota leader's face as she spoke, saw suspicion war with curiosity. When she finished, he exchanged words with his warriors, then addressed Canty's father directly. The chief responded calmly, occasionally gesturing toward me. I stood my ground, though fear made my knees weak, aware that my life hung on the outcome of this conversation. Finally, the Lakota leader made a sharp gesture of dismissal. Without another word, he mounted his horse and led his warriors away, though many cast backward glances filled with lingering suspicion. As they disappeared over the ridge, I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. What happened? What did you tell them? Father said, You came to warn us of soldiers' plans, Canty explained. Said you risked much to protect Arapaho. Lakota chief did not believe at first, but she touched the medicine pouch at her throat, similar to the one she had given me. He saw you wear this, knew you were under Arapaho protection. Relief made me lightheaded. Will they come back? Maka joined us, his face grim. Not today. But Lakota have long memories. And now they know White Girl lives with Arapaho. I don't live with you, I began, but stopped at the look that passed between brother and sister. You cannot return to your cabin now, Canty said quietly. Lakota will watch trails, and soldiers search for you already. What do you mean? How could they be searching for me? Maka exchanged words with another warrior, who had just ridden into camp. Scout saw blue coats at your cabin yesterday, he reported. Many men, searching inside, outside, they find something that makes them angry. My mind raced. What could they have found? Then I remembered the gifts from the Arapaho, the dried herbs, the tanned hides, worked in their distinctive style, evidence of my friendship with those the army considered enemies. If you go back, they arrest you. Maka said bluntly, say you spy for Indians. Or Lakota find you first, take revenge for their dead young men. I looked from him to Canty, the reality of my situation sinking in. I couldn't go home. Perhaps I never could again. What do? I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. Canty took my hand. You stay. Learn our ways. Become ghost to White World. The chief approached, speaking directly to me for the first time. Though I couldn't understand his words, his intent was clear from his gestures, his inclusion of me in the protective circle of his arm as he addressed the gathered tribe. He says, you are now under Bear Clan protection, Canty translated. You saved his daughter's life, now he saves yours. I wish I could say the transition was easy, that I adapted quickly to life among the Arapaho. The truth is far messier. Those first months were among the hardest of my life, harder in some ways than the lonely time after my parents' death. Then, at least, I had been in my own home, surrounded by the familiar. Among the Arapaho, I was always the outsider, the curiosity. Some, like Canty and her immediate family, welcomed me without reservation. Others tolerated my presence only out of respect for their chief. Children followed me, touching my strange clothes, my hair so different from theirs. Women watched me struggle with the most basic tasks, tanning hides, preparing pemmican, constructing a tipi, with amusement or impatience. My saving grace was my willingness to learn, to work without complaint, and perhaps most importantly to laugh at my own mistakes. Gradually, wariness gave way to cautious acceptance. Canty was my constant companion, my interpreter, my guide in this new life. She taught me her language with tireless patience, correcting my pronunciation, explaining nuances of meaning. In return, I helped with tasks my settler upbringing had prepared me for, sewing with steel needles, preserving berries, reading the few books I had brought in my saddlebags. As autumn painted the hills in rust and gold, we moved to the winter camp, a sheltered valley where springs kept the worst of the cold at bay. Here, in the long evenings around the fires, I learned the stories of the Arapaho people, their creation myths, their heroes, their history. I came to understand their deep connection to the land, so different from the settler view of ownership and conquest. It was during this time that news reached us of increasing tensions between whites and natives throughout the territory. Trappers who occasionally traded with the Arapaho brought rumors of clashes, of broken treaties, of demands for all tribes to confine themselves to designated areas far from their traditional hunting grounds. "War comes," Maka told me one night as we sat with Canty beside the central fire. "Not this winter, maybe not next summer, but it comes." "It doesn't have to," I argued, though even to my own ears, the words sounded naive. "Surely there's room enough for everyone, if people would just listen to each other." He gave me a look that was not unkind, but held the weight of generations of experience I couldn't share. White chiefs do not listen. They talk, make promises, break promises. Always same. I had no response. He was right, and we both knew it. As winter deepened, I found myself thinking often of my cabin, wondering if snow now drifted through the broken door, if animals had made homes in the corners I once kept so carefully swept. I thought of my parents' graves, unmarked now that the wooden crosses had surely rotted or been trampled. Would anyone remember they had lived, had loved, had dreamed of a future in this wild country? Would anyone remember I had existed when I was gone? Canty found me one evening at the edge of camp, watching the sun set behind distant mountains. "You are sad," she said. "Not a question, but a statement of fact. You miss your home." "Sometimes," I admitted. "Not the place so much as the certainty." I knew who I was there. She considered this, her face thoughtful in the fading light. "Who are you?" The question caught me off guard. "Emma Caldwell," I said. "And now? Who are you now?" I had no ready answer. After a moment, I said, "I don't know anymore." Canty smiled, a rare full smile that transformed her solemn face. "Good," she said. "Not knowing leaves room for becoming." That winter brought another change, one I had not anticipated. Maka, who had been my teacher in wilderness skills, my occasional antagonist in debates about white and native ways, began to seek my company specifically. He brought me choice cuts of meat from his hunting, asked me to help him improve his English, sat beside me at evening gatherings. I was not so naive that I misunderstood his intentions, but I was uncertain how to respond. He was handsome, brave, intelligent. Any woman would be fortunate to receive his attention. But I was not Arapaho, would never truly be Arapaho, no matter how well I learned their ways. Canty watched this development with knowing eyes, but said nothing until the night Maka presented me with a beautifully crafted knife, its handle inlaid with shells and stones. "My brother has serious intentions," she said, as we prepared for sleep in the tipi we shared. "Such gifts are not given lightly." "I know," I said, the knife heavy in my hands. "But Canty, I'm white. Your people would never accept such a union." She shrugged. "Some would not. Some already see you as Bear Clan, and Maka is respected warrior, son of chief. His choice carries weight." "And what do you think?" I asked, suddenly desperate for her opinion. She was quiet for a long moment, arranging her sleeping robes. "I think hearts do not know colors," she said finally. "I think life is short, joy rare. I think you make each other strong." It was as close to blessing as I could hope for, and it eased something in me I hadn't realized was tight with worry. Still, I made no hasty decision. The knife I accepted as a gift of friendship, nothing more. And Maka, perceptive as always, did not press for an immediate answer to his unspoken question. Spring came early that year, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the earth. With it came increasing reports of soldier movements, of settlements expanding along the river valleys. The tribal council met frequently, debating whether to move farther north, whether to attempt once more to negotiate with the white authorities, whether to join forces with other tribes for protection or warfare. It was during one such council that a scout rode into camp at a gallop, his horse lathered with exertion. He spoke rapidly to the chief, gesturing eastward. The reaction was immediate, warriors reaching for weapons, women gathering children close. "What's happening?" I asked Canty, who had gone pale beneath her copper skin. "Soldiers," she said, her voice tight. "Many soldiers with big guns, coming this way." Fear clutched at my heart. "How many? How far?" "Too many, too close." She gripped my arm. "We must move now, into mountains." The camp dissolved into organized chaos as the Arapaho prepared for immediate departure. I helped Canty gather her few possessions, rolled sleeping robes, secured packs to travois. Within an hour, the entire tribe was moving northwest toward the higher peaks where cavalry would struggle to follow. We traveled hard for 2 days, stopping only when necessary, pushing the elderly and the young to their limits. On the morning of the 3rd day, we reached a high valley, sheltered on 3 sides by steep slopes, with a clear spring bubbling from the rocks. Here the chief called a halt, sending scouts back the way we had come to track the soldiers' movements. As we made camp, Maka found me helping to erect Canty's tipi. "Emma," he said, his expression grave. "Need to speak with you." He led me to a boulder overlooking the valley, ensuring we were out of earshot of others. "Scouts say soldiers follow our trail," he said, without preamble, "not give up chase." "Why?" "The Arapaho have done nothing to provoke them." Maka's mouth twisted bitterly. "Existing provokes them." He hesitated, then added, "They ask for you at last, trading post. Describe you. Offer reward." I felt the blood drain from my face. For me, why would they? "They say you spy for Indians. Say you warn tribes of army plans, help them escape." He gave me a look that was both proud and worried. Not wrong. But that was once, and only because they threatened to relocate me. I stopped, realizing how hollow my defense sounded. From the Army's perspective, I was indeed a traitor, a white woman who had chosen to side with the enemy. "What do we do?" I asked. Maka looked out over the valley, his profile sharp against the sky. "Council thinks we separate. Half go north, join Crow cousins. Half go west into mountains where soldiers cannot follow with big guns. And you? What do you think?" He turned to me, his eyes holding mine. "I think you are in danger with us. More danger than alone." Understanding dawned slowly. "You want me to leave?" "Want? No." His hand found mine, squeezed it briefly. "But perhaps need, for your safety, for tribe's safety." I pulled away, anger flaring. "So I'm to be sent away like an unwanted burden, after all this time?" "Not unwanted," he said sharply. "Never that. But Emma, think, if soldiers find you with us, what happens? They kill warriors, take women, children to reservation, take you to fort, hang as traitor." His voice softened. "If you go now, go east, perhaps reach territory where they not look for you, start new life. Without you, without Canty, without the only family I have left." The words emerged bitter, wounded. Maka's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, a flicker of emotion quickly controlled. I turned away, tears burning behind my eyes. He was right, and I hated it. My presence endangered everyone who had shown me kindness, who had taken me in when I had nowhere else to go. How could I repay that by bringing destruction upon them? When? I asked, my voice barely audible. Tonight, Scout will take you east to trading post run by Frenchman. He not friend to army. Will help you travel to St. Louis, perhaps. St. Louis. A city I had never seen, filled with strangers. A place where I might disappear, become someone new, someone without a past. The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. Does Canty know? Maka nodded. She prepares things for your journey. Comes to say goodbye soon. He rose to leave, but I caught his hand. Wait, your question, the one you never asked with words. My answer is yes, it would have been yes. He stilled, his fingers tightening around mine. For a moment I thought he might pull me into his arms, might make this parting even more impossible to bear. Instead, he pressed his forehead to mine, a gesture of intimacy I had seen between Arapaho couples. In another life, he said softly. In a better world. He left me there on the boulder, staring out at the valley that had briefly been home, at the people who had become family, wondering how fate could be so cruel as to show me where I belonged, only to tear me away from it. Canty found me as the sun was setting, bringing a pack with food, a water skin, spare moccasins. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her movements were practical, efficient. Marcel will guide you to French trading post, she said, naming a young warrior who had always been kind to me. 2 days' journey. From there, you take boat down river. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Canty knelt beside me, took my hands in hers. Listen to me, Emma Coldwell. You saved my life at river, I saved yours by bringing you to my people. Now we save each other again by parting. She pressed something into my palm, a small pouch similar to the medicine bundle she had given me before. This will protect you on journey, keep you strong. I can't leave, I whispered. I can't leave you. Any of you. You must. Her voice was gentle but firm. Or we all suffer. You know this is true. I did know it, had known it from the moment Maka told me soldiers were searching specifically for me, but knowing didn't make it any easier to accept. I'll never see you again, I said. The words a physical pain in my chest. Canty's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away. Perhaps not in this life. But spirits find each other always. You are my sister now, in all ways that matter. Distance cannot change this. We held each other then, 2 women from different worlds, who had somehow bridged the gulf between them, who had found in each other something like family. When we finally separated, both our faces were wet. Be strong, Canty said, touching my cheek one last time. Be Emma who saves, who survives. I left that night, following Marcel through mountain paths lit only by stars. We traveled hard, stopping only when necessary, always alert for signs of soldiers or hostile tribes. On the evening of the 2nd day, we sighted the trading post, a sturdy log structure on the banks of a wide stream that eventually fed into the Missouri River. Marcel would go no further. He watched from the trees as I approached the post alone, my heart pounding with fear and uncertainty. The French trader, Jean-Baptiste, proved to be exactly as Maka had described, no friend to the army, and willing to help a young woman in trouble, especially one vouched for by the Arapaho, with whom he had long maintained good relations. He arranged passage for me on a supply boat heading downriver, introducing me as his widowed niece from Montreal, traveling east to stay with relatives. The story was simple enough that I could maintain it without difficulty, and my time with the Arapaho had given my skin enough color from the sun that I might pass for French if I was careful with my accent. The journey east is another story, one of long days on the river, of nights in strange towns, of constant fear of discovery. Suffice to say, I eventually reached St. Louis, where I found work as a seamstress, and later as a teacher of young children, my mother's careful instruction in letters finally proving useful. I never returned west. News reached us occasionally of Indian wars, of treaties signed and broken, of tribes forced onto reservations far from their ancestral lands. I scanned every report for mention of the Arapaho, particularly the Bear Clan, but information was scarce and often contradictory. Years passed. I built a life of sorts, though I never married, never felt at home in the city with its noise and crowds and rigid proprieties. Sometimes at night I would close my eyes and imagine myself back in that high valley, listening to Conti sing as she worked, watching Maka return from a hunt, proud and strong. It was in the winter of 1852, 15 years after I left the Arapaho, that a package arrived for me at the small school where I taught. It had passed through many hands, been forwarded from address to address as I moved about the city. The wrapping was worn. The writing faded, but my name was clear, Emma Caldwell. Inside was a necklace, an Arapaho medicine pouch decorated with blue and white beads, identical to the one Canty had given me years before, which I had lost during my journey east. With it was a small piece of birch bark, with words scratched onto it in a careful hand. Sister still lives. Bear Clan survives in North Country. The river remembers you. There was no signature, but there didn't need to be. Only one person could have sent it, could have tracked me across the vastness of the country, could have known exactly what would bring me both joy and unbearable sorrow. I wore that necklace every day until this spring, when the fever took hold and the doctor from Fort Laramie shook his head over my wasted frame. I leave it now to whoever finds these pages, along with my story, the true account of how a settler girl found her place among those she had been taught to fear, and how the hardest act of love is sometimes letting go. The rain has stopped. Through my window, I can see the river glinting in the distance, flowing ever onward, carrying secrets and sorrows in its depths. Soon enough, I will join my parents in the earth of this land that has taken so much and given so much in return. But perhaps Canty was right. Perhaps spirits find each other. Always. Perhaps somewhere beyond this life, we will all meet again. My parents, Canty, Maka, all those I have loved and lost, in a place where the divisions that tore us apart in this world no longer matter. Until then, let the river judge me as it will.